If we're worried about the Chicago Bears missing out on one of the top NFL draft prospects they like running back Ashton Jeanty from Boise State or offensive lineman Will Campbell from LSU, then we need to look at the possibility of moving up to get their guy.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, we look at the prospect of trading up, who the Bears might be willing to trade up for, how far they would have to trade up to get those players, and what it would cost to move up from the 10th overall pick into the top 7, into the top 5, if that right prospect is the player the Bears have to have. Yesterday on the podcast, we talked about the possibility of moving down and where the challenges are in that and where they could go, what it might take to do so. So if you haven't listened to that, make sure you go back and take a listen to that. But I want to look at the other direction today, moving on up, because I think there are a few different categories here, like 3 different paths here of who you would move up for and how far you would have to move up to do so. I think there is the big move up into like the number 4 or number 5 pick, like move up into the top 5 to get one of the blue chip players if they fall. You know, if Penn State's Abdul Carter makes it to 4, or if Mason Graham from Michigan makes it to 4 or 5, moving up there to secure one of the top defensive players in this draft class. It's expensive, but is it worth it to get a difference-making defensive lineman that you just like better than some of the other lineman prospects in this draft? There's the possibility of moving up for an offensive lineman, which could be as early as the Patriots at 4, could be a threat to take a player like Will Campbell, or lower in the top 10. I think that has its own set of scenarios and challenges. And then also the running back conversation. Ashton Jeanty, who the threats are to take Jeanty, how high you would have to move in order to get him, and what that would cost. Let's start big here and kind of go, I don't want to say pie in the sky, but definitely the most aggressive, extreme potential move up here is if, let's say hypothetically, we go through the first 3 picks of the draft, and in some order, it's Cam Ward, probably number 1 to the Tennessee Titans, and then say it's Travis Hunter, number 2 to the Cleveland Browns, and Shedeur Sanders, number 3 to the Giants. Or you could flip those and go Ward, Sanders, Travis Hunter. But let's say hypothetically, those 3 players are the top 3 players taken in the draft. And we get to the New England Patriots are on the clock with the 4th overall pick. And both Penn State's Abdul Carter and Michigan defensive lineman Mason Graham are still on the board. Is that an opportunity where you go, yeah, the Bears were never going to trade up to 1. We're never really going to trade up to 2, probably not even 3. Like, that's a really big leap. But is 4, from 10 to 4, a more reasonable, approachable trade up? Now, in theory, when you trade into the top 5, there's almost always a premium, right? You can look at the draft trade charts that assign a numeric value to every pick and do the math and say, you know, this is how much, if you add these picks, it adds up to the same value as those, but those are not necessarily always universally followed. And some years teams have to give up more to get up higher. Some years teams have to give up less to get up higher. And that's where it becomes a little bit tricky to find like a universal price here. But it feels to me like in this draft class, if you're trading up for, you know, for a guy like Carter or or Graham, and you're trying to convince the Patriots not to take him, it's going to take a lot to get there. Most likely, it would cost maybe a future first-round pick. Like you give up 10 this year, and then next year's first to get someone like Carter, to get to 4 for the chance to pick. I would probably take Carter over Mason Graham at that spot. But we could enter the same conversation with, okay, maybe the Patriots don't want to trade down from 4. They take Carter, but then you got the Jaguars at 5, and you want to trade up to 5 to get Mason Graham, right? It'll cost a little bit less to go from 5 to 4, but we're kind of in the same general range of like, those are your 2 options to get these top guys. It's going to be tough for them to fall much farther than that. But is there a set of picks and a set of circumstances where, you know, you could get up there without giving up your future first round pick? I think it's certainly a possibility. Like the all-time example of this, if you want to cherry pick the best deal in a draft class that was not viewed as very strong, 2013, the Miami Dolphins traded up from 12 to 3, and all they had to give up was a second-round pick. They traded the 12th pick and the 42nd pick to the Raiders to get to number 3, where they took bust edge rusher Deion Jordan out of Oregon, I should say properly, and that, from a trade value standpoint, is a steal. You can give just a first and a second to go from 12 to 3. We have not seen really any other team be able to get that good of a deal to go from 12 to 3. We're talking 10 to 3 for the Bears, so it's a slightly more valuable first round pick. But as I look at a potential deal to go up there, like you're giving up 10 and your second round pick for sure. Like that's the bare minimum here. I think to get up to the Patriots at 5th, it's going to take more than just your first and your second round pick this year to go from 10 to 3. I don't know if your 5th round pick is enough. I think that's a starting point. You know, could you have some sort of a trade where you give up, you know, your first, one of your seconds, and your third, but then in return, the Patriots give you the 4th overall pick and a draft pick back. Like they give you their 4th round pick and maybe a 5th, you know, like if you give up your 1, 2, 3 and they give you 1, 4, 5 in return. So like you're still getting, you're giving up your 1st, 2nd, and 3rd round picks, but then you're getting extra picks back to sort of offset that a little bit. You know, it just kind of depends on how desperate you are to move up and how willing the Patriots are to move down and what other trade options they might have. Because I think if Carter and Graham were there at 4, you're going to have multiple teams trying to trade up to 4. And then all of a sudden you have to give up even more than just a 2nd and a 5th round pick to get there. So I think that cost ends up being even higher than just, you know, the picks you don't mind giving up. It may have to be your 1st, your 2nd, and your 3rd, and maybe you get a little something back in return. Is that worth it for the top edge rusher in this class, Abdul Carter? Like, it very well could be. I think he's head and shoulders better than the rest of this draft class, but is he as good as the other top edge rushers that have gone at the beginning of other recent draft classes? Like, I'm not sure he's quite in that full same category. Like when we think back to the last couple of seasons, you know, I guess there wasn't really a great edge rusher this previous draft, but prior to that, someone like Will Anderson goes 3rd overall to the Houston Texans. You know, is Abdul Carter at Will Anderson's level? He's probably not that far from it. Or like Aiden Hutchinson going number 2 overall to the Lions. Like, it's not that Carter's bad, but is he that category of player? He's probably pretty close. So then is it worth it? Like, it could be because you have the extra 2nd round pick already. If you're getting picks back, like, or maybe you say, okay, well, maybe not all of that to get to 4 to the Patriots, but maybe the Jaguars at 5. You know, could you get away with, if everybody wanted to trade up to 4, but less people were interested in trading up to 5, could you give up a 1st and a 2nd? And would that be enough to get from 10 to 5? I think it could, but the Jaguars are a team that the most common mock draft pick to the Jaguars is Michigan defensive tackle Mason Graham. So they would have to have Graham on the board and decide they don't really want him and are willing to move down to 10 in order for that to happen. But if they really want Mason Graham, it would cost an extra premium to get them to move out of that spot. And even then, they might not move out of that spot. And so that's where it's tricky to get that high to draft those kinds of special players. It's a little bit more manageable to go a little less high to get somebody like Ashton Genty, perhaps, or to get one of the top offensive linemen in this draft, like Will Campbell or Armand Membu. So we'll take a look at those scenarios and what it would cost and where the Bears might have to go next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Because maybe we haven't had the kind of buzzer beater upset excitement that you would have liked to see on the court. You can make it that much more exciting with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's an extra $200 to use on everything from those buzzer beaters and Cinderella stories to even just who's cutting down the nets. If you want to put your money where your mouth is on your bracket picks, you can ride those teams all the way to the top with spreads, totals, and game props. Or you can also bet on the upcoming NFL draft, the NBA season, Major League Baseball is underway now, hockey, soccer, tennis, boxing, you name it all. They've got it all in the FanDuel app. That's easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long with America's #1 sportsbook. So maybe the full swing up to 4 and 5 for Carter and Graham is both more expensive than you might want to give up, but also I think less likely. I think the Patriots would be happy to stay there and take a player like Carter or Graham, and the Jaguars vice versa, right? Like those great defensive linemen are there. I don't know that the Patriots are really going to want to move down there. Although there's a world where the Patriots do offensive line instead, and there's a whole other scenarios we can get into there. But maybe a trade up just a handful of spots would be more approachable, more affordable, and more likely that a team would be willing to move down a few spots as opposed to the Patriots moving from 4 to 10 or the Jaguars moving from 5 to 10 and missing out on a truly special top 3, top 5 type of talent in this draft class. And that's where I come back to Ashton Jeanty, the Boise State running back. I certainly, personally, do not believe it is worth trading up for Ashton Jeanty. If another team wants to take him in the top 10, be my guest. I think he's a great running back. I think he's going to have a good NFL career. I don't see it being a worthwhile investment of extra draft picks to move up for the chance to take a running back in the first round. If he's there at 10, it's a little bit of a different conversation, but giving up picks is a little bit harder for me personally. But we've seen Ben Johnson prioritize a running back like Jahmyr Gibbs, and it's certainly not out of the question that the Bears could look to do so. So I want to still talk through what that might look like and what that might cost. So I think, first of all, we have to look at, the teams that are the biggest threats to take Ashton Jeanty. It's like, okay, if you're going to trade up for Jeanty, you would want to trade up as few spots as possible, right? You don't want to trade up to 5 or 4 and realize, well, no one was going to take Jeanty until, later anyway. So really, all you need to do is get ahead of one spot ahead of where you think he might go. And when you look at this year's top 10, honestly, we don't talk enough about the possibility that the New England Patriots could take him at 4. Probably not going to happen. But with Mike Vrabel in charge, he's been on a spending spree. Yeah, they have Ramondre Stevenson, and he's fine. But can Ashton Jeanty be his Derrick Henry from Tennessee? I mean, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think they would take Jeanty over, Carter and Graham, and maybe not even over an offensive lineman like Campbell or Membu. But nonetheless, that's a possibility that I think we should not rule out. But we're ruling out trading up that high anyway. So if we ignore the Patriots for now, I don't necessarily think the Jaguars are going to take Jeanty at 5. I know ETN has had some ups and downs, but I don't know that that's going to be the way that they want to go with that first pick. The real top threat for Ashton Jeanty is the Raiders at 6. That's the team that, when you look at mock drafts, and there are websites that actually track all the different mock drafts and see who are the most popular players going to what teams. The most popular Raiders mock draft pick is Ashton Jeanty. Raiders fans are on board with Ashton Jeanty. Draft experts see them taking Jeanty. There's a pretty clear alignment there that Jeanty is a strong possibility. Now, maybe they would rather take someone like Shedeur Sanders if they want to get their quarterback. Maybe they would rather go for a wide receiver like Tedaroya McMillan, because now that they got rid of Devontae Adams, they could kind of use a number 1 wide receiver replacement. There are different pathways the Raiders could go, but they definitely seem like the top Jeanty threat. But then, the Jets at 7, they've got Breece Hall. They used a second-round pick on a couple years ago. They got Braylon Allen they drafted last year. They drafted 2 running backs last year. I don't think the Jets at 7 are a huge Ashton Genty threat. The Carolina Panthers at 8 are interesting, but not necessarily that big of a threat. Chuba Hubbard just had 1,000 yards rushing for them. They just signed another 1,000-yard rusher in free agency, Enrico Dowdle, and they drafted Jonathan Brooks in the second round out of Texas last year. I think he was the first running back drafted last year. So Panthers not really much of a threat. The Saints are the last one here at 9. That, yes, they have Alvin Kamara, but we don't know how much longer they're going to have Alvin Kamara. They don't have much else at running back. They could use more running back talent there, and they're definitely kind of the second biggest threat for Genty. Like it's maybe the Patriots, but then Raiders at 6, Saints at 9. And if the Raiders are your Genty threat at 6, then does that mean you'd have to trade up to 5 to get past the Raiders to take Ashton Genty? Like we just talked about how expensive it would be to get to 5 for somebody like Mason Graham. Are you going to give up your first and second round pick to take Ashton Genty 5th overall? That to me does not feel worth it. And so that's a lot to give up for even a very good running back, a first and a second round pick for a running back like that. Like when guys like Saquon Barkley hit free agency, Josh Jacobs hits free agency, like you can sign these guys on the street sometimes. There's just not a world where giving up your first and second round pick to take Genty is worth it, a good value for a player like that, even as good as Genty is. So, okay, then if you're not trading up to 5 to pass the Raiders at 6, then you just have to hope and pray that he gets past the Raiders at 6. But then if he gets past the Raiders at 6, then we just said the Jets aren't taking him at 7, and the Panthers aren't taking him at 8. So then your only other threat is the Saints at 9. And so then, okay, if you want to get past the Saints at 9, then all you got to do is jump to the Panthers at 8. That's only a 2-spot jump. That becomes a lot more affordable, a lot more reasonable. You look back at other trades in recent years. I know the Bears moved down 1 spot from 9 to 10 and got a 4th round pick from the Philadelphia Eagles in the Jalen Carter, Darnell Wright trade. So you might say, well, can the Bears just give a 4th round pick to move up 2 spots in this case? The problem is the Chicago Bears do not have a 4th round pick in this year's draft. So you can't just give a 4th round pick to move up 2 spots. And I don't think you can make up for your 4th round pick with your 5th round pick and 2 7th round picks. That won't be enough. So the only way you move from 10 to 8 is either you give up a future draft pick, which would probably have to be a future 3rd round pick to equate to a present 4th round pick. It's kind of how the math works in that. Or you give up your 3rd round pick with the 10th overall pick, but then the Panthers give you picks back in exchange. Now the Bears already have the Panthers' 2nd round pick, but say the Bears give up their 1st round pick and their 3rd round pick. 3rd round pick is number 72. And then in exchange, the Panthers give you their 4th round pick at 111 and maybe even like a 5th round pick at 140. So you're giving up your 3, but they're giving you a 4 and a 5 back. Like something along that to offset that, yeah, it's not worth it for the Bears to just give them a 1st and a 3rd to go from 10 to 8. That's way too much. But if they can give you some picks back, or maybe you trade down in one of these rounds, I guess there's not much movement between the Bears and the Panthers pick in the 3rd round. So like you get your 3rd and they give you 2 4ths back. Like the Bears 1st and 3rd for the Panthers 1st and 2 4ths. Something to kind of offset how much you're giving up just to move up those 2 spots. But it's tricky though, right? Like you don't want to give up your chance to pick in the 3rd round, even if you're getting 2 4th round picks back. It doesn't feel like there's great pick math that just adds up for both teams getting what they want without the Bears having to give up that 3rd. Even if you're getting picks back, you don't want to lose the opportunity to pick a top 75 player and move into picking a top outside of the top 100 in those 4th round picks. So then, okay, would you rather trade a future draft pick or could you get a future pick back from the Panthers instead? Like that all feels a little bit tricky there. So like Genty feels like the most difficult to move up for there because you're not getting past, it's too expensive to move past the Raiders at 6. And it's kind of awkward and difficult to move past the Saints at 9. So then are you left kind of keeping your fingers crossed that he makes it all the way down to where you're picking? It's kind of what I come back to a little bit with Genty. I think the sweet spot in here, if we're looking for the Goldilocks trade possibility where the defensive lineman in the top 5 is too hot, too much to trade, the Genty trade up is too cold, and it doesn't really work to trade up just like 2 spots there very well, then what's our just right Goldilocks trade scenario? I think it's the offensive lineman, whether that's Will Campbell or Armand Membu. You hit more of a sweet spot of like where you would trade to where the threats are and what it might cost to get that player. So we'll kind of take a look at how this would work for, it doesn't really matter to me which of the two offensive linemen you want to prioritize here. It's more about the player, the position, and the pick next on Locked On Bears. I once again do come back to the New England Patriots are really the biggest wild card here for the entire Chicago Bears draft class, because they're the team who have needs that align the closest with what the Bears need and are in a position to take all of the players the Bears might take, but 6 picks earlier. Because I think they're a team that could take Abdul Carter. They're a team that could take Mason Graham. I think they're a dark horse team that could take Ashton Jeanty. But they're a very common team for mock drafts picking Will Campbell from LSU or offensive tackle Armand Membu from Missouri. Like those, like all of these players that we talk about is like the ideal picks for the Bears if they're there at 10 are all players the Patriots could take at 4. And they really control a lot of the destiny for the Bears. We might have to do a more in-depth segment just on that exact dynamic, because I think it's the Patriots there, and then also what happens with Shedeur Sanders in the top 10. You know, if Shedeur Sanders goes 2 or 3, then that pushes Carter and Graham down to the Patriots at 4. But if Shedeur Sanders doesn't go 2 or 3, then Carter and Graham might go in the top 3, and then the Patriots could take an offensive lineman at 4, and it could, there's a lot of ripple effects between Shedeur Sanders, where he goes, and then also what the New England Patriots take at 4. Because they could take Campbell, they could take Membu, they could take Jeanty, they could take Abdul Carter, they could take Mason Graham. They're the first big offensive line threat team early in this. Again, we're sort of ruling out the possibility. We've talked through the possibility of trading up that high. Doesn't seem super, super likely. But if you really want to make sure you grab Membu because he's the offensive tackle you really believe in, or if you really want to grab Will Campbell because you see him as a left tackle, he's a blue chip guy, and you got to just make sure you go and get him. I again kind of want to walk through briefly who the real threats are here. Patriots at 4, we've already pretty cleanly established here. The Jaguars are pretty firmly expected to take a defensive lineman like Mason Graham there. They used early draft picks and offensive tackles the last couple of seasons in Anton Harrison and Walker Little. They just signed a couple of interior linemen in free agency. So I don't think they're necessarily going to go offensive line there with the 5th overall pick. We come back to the Raiders at 6, who I think they could be in this conversation, where they've got their left tackle is Colton Miller, their first round pick from 2018. They used a 3rd round pick on a tackle last year in DJ Glaze, who's set to start for them at right tackle. Maybe they're satisfied enough with that, but maybe they could see the possibility for an upgrade there. They could use another guard, but I don't know if they want to take a guard 6 overall for somebody like Will Campbell. So they're a light possibility, but I wouldn't say super, super strong there for the Raiders at 6. But the Jets at 7 is kind of the next big offensive tackle threat there. They used a 4th round pick last year on a right tackle who's slated to start this year, but I don't know if they're super thrilled about a 4th round pick starting at offensive tackle this year. At right tackle, it's Carter Warren for them. He was the 4th round pick out of Pittsburgh last season. They've got Olu Fashanu. Their 1st round pick last year was an offensive tackle from Penn State. He's going to start at left tackle for them. But if they look at this draft board and say, well, best player available is another tackle, they want a right tackle like Armand Membu to really bolster both of those 2 tackle spots, I think that's a very real possibility. Is it the most likely pick for them? We'll see. I think currently mock drafts have him and Mason Graham and Will Campbell as kind of the top options there. Will Johnson as well as a possibility for them. They could go in a few different directions depending on who falls. They also have some similar needs to the Bears in terms of O-line and D-line being big options for them, just not running back there. And then we go to real quickly to the Carolina Panthers at 8. They're pretty set at the offensive tackle position. They've got a veteran in Taylor Moton on the right side, and then Ikem Ekwonu, their 1st round pick from a few years on the left side there. They're probably not a big tackle threat. The Saints at 9, though, are, again, they're right there to take potentially a right tackle replacement, potentially an interior offensive lineman guy. Like, they've got some flexibility on the O-line, but they could be, especially a Will Campbell possibility for somebody that could play tackle or play guard. They kind of did the same thing last year with Talise Fuaga out of Oregon State, and they can kind of get flexible with these linemen and move them around if they really, really want to. But, like, for me, it's Patriots at 4, Jets at 7, and then maybe the Saints at 9. And any of those, like once you get past the Patriots at 4, they could all free fall from there. I don't think any of those teams necessarily are destined to take one of these guys. Jets, again, the most likely. So, okay, if the Jets are the next threat after the Patriots at 7, then that means you'd have to move up to 6, and maybe the Raiders are sitting at 6. Well, again, it's tough because the Raiders want to trade down from 6? If you're trading up to 6, couldn't you just take Genty there? If the Raiders were willing to trade down from 6 because they didn't want Genty anyway, or maybe Genty goes 4 to the Patriots. I mean, we can find the different scenario to make it work. It's not necessarily that important. But if you trade up to make sure you get a lineman for some reason, because maybe somebody trades up to 5 and takes Genty. How about that? We'll make it a hypothetical that way. So then Genty's gone. The Raiders are there at 6 saying, well, we don't want to stay at 6 anymore. We'll move down. And the Bears say, great, I can move to 6 and get ahead of the Jets to get the offensive lineman I want. I think to get up to 6, it may still cost more than just a first and a third. Like a first and a second alone is probably too much to get up to 6 and to take an offensive lineman. But to me, it feels like one of these situations where, like we talked about, you give the Raiders 10, the 10th overall pick and one of your second round picks, but then the Raiders send you back their third round pick, right? Or they send you some combination of picks back to offset that. Yeah, giving up just your first and a second to move up 4 spots is probably too much. But giving up your first and a third is probably not enough to move up those 4 spots into the top 10. And so if you give up a first and one of your seconds, but then get the Raiders' third back in return, that helps offset that damage where you still have one of your other second-round picks because the Bears have 2 of them, but you're adding another third-round pick in the process just to ensure that you get the top offensive lineman that you feel like you just can't miss out on. That, to me, can feel really worth it. If you're Ryan Poles and you're 100% confident that Will Campbell is a blue-chip starting left tackle in the NFL, or that Armand Membu is a blue-chip starting left tackle in the NFL, or you can move Darnell Wright to left tackle and start Membu at right tackle, whatever. If you're 100% confident that this offensive lineman is the last piece you need to finish the group in front of Caleb Williams, and so much better than Kelvin Banks and all the other offensive tackles you can get in this draft class, I think that trade up to even 6, giving up one of your second-round picks, getting a third or whatever in exchange back with it, would absolutely be worth it. Like, you have 2 second-round picks. That gives you some ammunition to move up if you truly believe that player is great. If that player turns out to be great, it would be well worth that trade. Just like if that player turns out to not be great, it would be a horrible trade, and it would be a horrible pick if you stayed at 10 and picked them and they turned out to be great. Like, no matter what you give up to get them or where you take them, the most important thing that matters is whether they're actually a top 10 caliber blue chip player. And what you gave up doesn't really matter if the player is correct, and where you picked it doesn't really matter if the player is wrong either. It's about getting the right player and being sure that that's what you're adding. And so I think getting to the Raiders at 6 would make some sense there, or we get back to like trying to jump the Saints at 9 to 8, and it becomes tricky because if the Jets might take him at 7, if he gets past the Jets, you go to the Panthers at 8, and we're again stuck in that same sort of loop that we were talking about with the Ash and Genty trade. So to me, like that's kind of the range that makes this the most sense to me. Like, you're either kind of going all out to get to 5 with the Jaguars, or maybe you're going to 6 with the Raiders, 7 with the Jets, but you really don't need to go past the Panthers because they're not really a threat to take many of the kind of players you would want in this draft. And that's what makes this trade-up game tricky, but also kind of fun to work through the different possibilities and what it would cost and who you might get and who you need to trade up past. Ryan Poles, I'm sure, is working through all these things right now as part of their draft preparations. To me, the more likely trade is not up from 10, and it's not down from 10 either. The more likely trade, or the more intriguing trade, is trading up from 39, the Bears' first second-round pick. That, to me, is the sweet spot of being able to trade up from 39, maybe get back up into the first round, and grab one of the top offensive linemen there, one of the top defensive linemen there, get them in the first round on a 5th-year option type of contract, and get them before they go in the early second round or the late first. That's a scenario I want to talk through next week on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That's your team every day. And if you're looking for a second listen, you can always find more NFL draft talk over at the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez, where you can get the latest draft rankings and rumors and news every single day. So find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Coming back on Monday for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.